Welcome to the channel, folks. My name's Shane. In today's video, I've got a free tutorial for the Netflix approved Panasonic Lumix GH5S. I've recently purchased a couple of these again. That's right, I owned a few, sold them, bought them back because they're an absolute powerhouse, and if you get them for a bargain, it's well worth it. The video quality out of these cameras is every bit as good as far more expensive cameras on the market. The low light performance is awesome. If you're looking for a great studio camera, something that you'll be leaving on a tripod, I'm shooting with one right now, these make a whole lot of sense. No doubt this video will be quite long, so I'm going to timestamp every section of this video down in the description below. If you can, please leave a thumbs up. I'm not sure how many people will see this in 2022, but it's definitely a video that I think a few people will benefit from. I'll also share with you the kind of settings that I use personally for doing the content creation stuff here on YouTube. Let's get into it. As of shooting this video at the start of November in 2022, I'm on version firmware 2.5. If you've owned a GH5 for a long time and never updated the firmware, go do it. I'll link down in the description to the Panasonic firmware website. First up, I want to show you how to attach a lens to the Panasonic GH5S. So if you're just getting started, this is how you do it. Take off the cap on the lens here, align the red dots, and click it into place. Once it clicks in, you're good to go. Let's take a look at the command dial on top of the camera. Now, the great news is this can be locked. So if you're unable to turn it, we get a push button on the top here. In the down position, it stops us from moving it accidentally. It's pretty hard to knock anyway, but it's a great little feature. Hit it again and it'll go up, which means we can then move it over to movie mode, which is the M with the little video camera icon. That'll be the mode that we're in for everything relating to the movie mode within the GH5S. When it comes to shooting video, these are some of the most important buttons on the camera. You can customize everything, and we'll talk more about that later. But basically, we get a white balance button, which sets the white balance accordingly to your room. Now, if you want to set the white balance, you should really get one of these. This really makes it easy. If you want to check this out, I'll link it down in the description below. You can also fold these up and just chuck them in your camera bag. If we tap the white balance button, it brings up the auto white balance mode. Now, if we take a look here, you can see we get auto white balance cool, auto white balance warm, sunny day, cloudy day, and a whole lot of others. If you want to set the white balance and customize it and save it in camera for a particular room, you want to use one of these four options right here. It doesn't matter which one you use, just reference it based on the ones you would use the most often. This is where this comes into it. So let's get over to this. We're going to put this in front of the screen here. We're going to push up on the white balance set, and then we can just simply use the shutter and it will set the white balance. Now, I've already stored my favorite one in here, but that's how you set the white balance. Some people will say you should use just the white side to white balance, but I get my best results using the gray side. You can, of course, also use this for exposure. Once you've got the white balance set, you can push down on this button over here, and it will allow you to adjust the colors even further. Now, for the GH5S, I don't feel the need to move it away from the green like I do on the GH5, which has a really green tint. Usually I would move it this way on the standard GH5. On the GH5S, you can, if you choose to, move it 2 notches to the top right to get away from the red. Now, what you're looking at on my main camera right now is stock. So this is how I use it, and I'll explain more about my settings later. But I love the color science on this camera. It is a good point of difference and an upgrade over the original GH5. Going back to these buttons on the top, there's an FN1 button. I always like to customize this for audio options. So I'm just going to hold this down for about 1.5 seconds. You'll then be presented with this screen on the camera. Now, this is a touch screen, so you can just use your finger if you so choose, but I'm going to stick to using the wheel so I don't get my fingerprints all over it. So these are all options that you can customize to that FN1 button. And once we find our audio settings, I'll show you how easy it is to set. So if we go down here, there's so many different options that it can be a bit overwhelming at the start. I'm going to go to sound record level adjust. Done. So now as I push the FN1 button on the top, there you go. I can see my audio levels. Now, if I want to change this, again, I can either use the touch screen, or I can push left and right on the wheel or cycle up and down like this. It's really great. I love the fluidity of the menu system, either if you're just using your finger on the screen or this dial over here. Let's take a look at the display button on the back of the camera. Now, not everybody loves the position of this, but personally, I've not had a problem with it whatsoever. If we tap it once, you'll notice that some of the display options disappear. This is handy if you want to nail critical focus, whatever the case may be. Now, if we hit it again, it brings up this menu. This is kind of like a quick menu option. This is where the touchscreen functionality really comes in. So if you want to change our exposure type from manual to say shutter priority, we can do that. If we want to change it to aperture priority, we can do that as well. So this is just a quick way of navigating the camera and changing some settings really quickly. Now, if you want to change the white balance, we can still do that from this menu, as well as changing the color profiles. Now, if you can hear some birds in the background, I do live in the sticks. I'm not sure if you can hear that or not. There's plenty of options in here, but it gives you a good sense of what's going on within the camera. And it also shows you how much recording time we have left down on the bottom right-hand side. The great news is you get all of the information on screen in this standard mode, so you don't actually need to go into that quick menu unless you need to make some changes. One of the great things about the Panasonic GH5S is its Wi-Fi connectivity. It pairs beautifully with the image app on any phone. This is a really fast app to get a Wi-Fi connection from your camera to the phone, and then you have full control over it remotely. I actually prefer the old app over the new one. It just seems to be more responsive and a little bit more intuitive. So if you do buy a GH5S, the app is still supported and it works beautifully. Rather than diving through the menus to get Wi-Fi working, I like to just assign it to this left click on the wheel here. So if I hold this down, it will bring up that custom menu again, and it says function button 20, because that's button 20 that you can assign, and you can then select Wi-Fi. It's the first option and you're done. What this means is just by tapping left on that button now, it will enable the Wi-Fi connectivity of the camera, so I can join it from my phone, launch the app, and I'll be done. Another one of my favorite custom buttons is this one right here. I like to assign this to Waveform and Vectorscopes. So what we're gonna do is just hold this in for about a second. From the page of custom options, we're on page 10 of 20, and I set this up for WFM or Waveform and Vectorscope. By tapping on the button on the front, it brings up the waveforms. If you don't know how to read these, look into some tutorials. It will make setting exposure a breeze. Hit it again, and it'll bring up the Vectorscope, which is great for setting the skin tone. And hit it again, it will disappear. While everyone might not need to use Vectorscope and waveforms, once you get more confident on how to set up a scene, for example, it's a really great tool to have. There's so many cameras that have come out, even in 2022, that don't have the same features as the GH5S. On the back of the GH5S, there's 3 main focus modes, but I'm only gonna focus on 2. Focus puns. Terrible. But anyway, we've got manual focus, which is the mode we're in. So to make things happen in manual focus mode, we can either turn the lens focus ring like this, which in turn allows us to focus between the foreground and the background. This is all done manually. Sorry about that door over there. It's horrendous. We can do it that way, or we can simply just move this little box and have it positioned wherever we like. So this is my preferred way of focusing. If we move it to the door handle, it's going to move to the door handle. And I'll show you this view as I move it back to the microphone. You'll see it just pull focus nice and fast, and then it's locked into place. The great news is you can set up this camera so once you've got it in focus, you can turn it off, turn it back on, and it will remember your settings. It's pretty awesome. When it comes to the autofocus modes, there's plenty of different modes to choose from. We click this to the AFC. We can still do the same thing. We can just use the little box that we can assign where we want it. We can also adjust the size of the box and make it as big or as small as we like, which is a really handy feature. We can also change the autofocus modes by tapping on this FN3 option over here, and this allows us to go through all of the different autofocus modes. If you're unfamiliar with the Panasonic autofocus system, it's a bit hit and miss. That's kind of putting it nicely. Sometimes it works great, other times it doesn't work at all. I did a video called Decoding the Panasonic Autofocus. I'll link it up in the cards. Check it out, and that will apply to this camera even with the latest firmware. Up next, I want to run you through what I think are the most important features to change within the menu system for my style of shooting. Now, this will vary from person to person, but it should also give you a clear understanding of what some of these features do. On the back of the camera, if we hit the menu set button, it brings up this option. Notice that the first one is exposure mode. It gives us all of the same settings that we'd get by using the quick display option menu over here that I showed you earlier. So we have full manual control mode, shutter priority, aperture priority, and program mode. Now, if you want to create the most amount of background blur, but you want to let the camera take care of the overall exposure, then use aperture priority mode. I'm in full manual mode here in the studio. I don't want anything to change at all. So for me, manual mode works the best. But if you're just getting started, try aperture priority to begin with. Make sure that your ISO is set to automatic and see how you go from there. Changing to aperture priority is nice and simple. All we need to do is click the menu set button, go up to the A and click menu set, and we're done. If you want the camera to assign the brightness in the scene, which is also the ISO setting, tap the ISO button on the top and use this control here to move it all the way to the left and set it to auto. Now it's going to automatically assign the brightness to the scene, but it will still give us f1.7, which is the fastest that this particular lens is capable of. Again, if you're looking for the background blur and you're just getting started, try aperture priority mode to begin with, then you can move over to manual mode once you understand the other settings. Let's turn on shutter angle and then I'll explain exactly what it does. Shutter angle is a variation of shutter speed. If we go down to the main menu here, all the way down to the bottom of the first page, we can see it says SS gain operation. You want to set this to angle ISO. If we go back to the main screen just by half tapping the shutter here, you can see it says 180 degrees over here. The beauty of this shutter angle is the fact that at 180 degrees, irrespective of my frame rate, so if I'm shooting at 24, 25, 30, 50, or 60, my shutter speed will be set accordingly. This is a really great feature. It saves you having to change it every time you change settings on your camera. Now, if you're in this mode and it says something other than 180 degrees down there, you use this back dial right here to change it up. So set this to 180 degrees and you're good to go. Let's go through the main video options within the Panasonic GH5S. That's right, I haven't even touched the surface on this camera yet. So I hope this video is helpful. If it is, please leave a thumbs up. If you're still watching, I appreciate it. Let's get into it. All right, so let's hit the menu set button on the back of the camera. We're gonna go down to the second option here, which is this video icon. You can simply just tap on it if you so choose to use it that way. Now there's 5 pages on here. I'm just gonna give you a quick rundown of the things that I change, and I'll show you on this screen because it's a bit easier to see. So as you can see, we've got recording format. If we hit the menu set button, it will bring us into the sub options on this particular menu system. So you can just literally get in and out by either using the back button over here or using the menu set button on here. That's how I'm going back and forwards within the menu system. As you can see, I've got mine set to MOV. I encourage you, if you want the best quality for editing and all that kind of stuff, set it to MOV. The recording quality option also allows us to change frame rates and resolutions all the way down the bottom here. At full HD at 25p in 8-bit, there's 10-bit options. There's all eye compression, which uses more data, but also gives you really great results. We can go all the way up to the 4K options here. These will go all the way up to 4K 8-bit at 50 frames per second. And then we also get the Cinema 4K options at 10-bit 25p or Cinema 4K 8-bit at 50p. Now, I'm in Australia, which is why you're seeing 25p and 50p options as opposed to 30p or 29.97 and 60 frames per second. So if your camera is purchased in North America, you'll see those options. Outside of the US and maybe a few other countries, it will be set to PAL. The biggest takeaway here is the highest resolutions are at the top of this list, and as we go down, we get the lowest resolutions. So full HD is at the bottom, Cinema 4K or DCI 4K is at the top. The ones that I like to shoot in, especially for YouTube, is this option right here, either 4K 10-bit 25p or the 4K 8-bit at 50 frames per second. And when it comes to 8-bit versus 10-bit, if you plan on grading your footage from scratch in Vlog-L, for example, or if you want to have a little bit more flexibility with the colors, choose the 10-bit codecs, but 8-bit is fine. It's what I use in the studio every single video. From the record quality option, if I go down to continuous AF, I've got it set to mode 2. Mode 2 allows autofocus to work even without recording. It's just a little bit easier sometimes to line up your shot that way. If you have it set to mode 1, it's only going to start using its autofocus system once you hit record. The Panasonic system also has autofocus custom settings. Now, it really depends on your particular situation, how you want to use this, but if you are sitting at a desk, I would turn the autofocus sensitivity down to -3. I would also turn the autofocus speed down to -1 or -2. Again, check out my Decoding the Panasonic Autofocus video for more information. For photo style, I love shooting in the natural profile. It's what I'm shooting with this GH5S right now. It gives me great straight out of camera colors with very little to do in editing. Here's my custom settings for the natural profile. I have the contrast down -1, the sharpness down -2, the noise reduction set to 0, the saturation to +1, so it's adding some saturation, and we have the hue set to 0. While I mostly shoot in the natural profile, when I'm outdoors using these cameras, I will shoot in the Vlog-L profile, and I'll show you how to get to that right now. So from this menu that we just saw before, we use this back command dial, and we just go through all of the settings until we get to Vlog-L. These two are really popular too, Cine D and Cine V. That's Vlog-L. Now, as you can see, this looks very washed out, but this allows you to color all of this footage in post. So if you want more creative control and more dynamic range, Vlog-L is the way to go. Vlog's probably a little bit too advanced for people just getting started. Again, if you like the look of this particular shot right now, start with the natural profile. All of my settings are explained in this video. From the photo styles option, if we go down to the next page here, we go into metering mode. Now, a lot of the times I leave this just set to the top option, which is that it measures the brightness of the whole, I should say scene automatically is what I would assume, because it's the scene, not necessarily the screen on the back, right? So yeah, it's interesting kind of maybe typo there. But basically, if we go down to this one is another one that I use a lot as well, measure the subject in the spot metering target. So if we go back to here, anything that comes up in the blue area will change the exposure that you see on the bottom of the shot here. This is a really great way of making sure that whatever is the main focus of your shot is exposed correctly. So one of these two options I will use. It really depends on what I'm doing. If I'm in the studio, I'll tend to leave it on this mode because I want my skin to be exposed properly without it blowing out any of the highlights on my head, for example. But you can experiment around with this. If you're just getting started again though, you can just leave this particular option set to the top one. From the metering mode, if we go down to iDynamic, it's currently set to off. Sometimes I'll use this on low. What this will do is it will adjust the brightness and contrast of a scene and give you what looks to be more dynamic range. And I'll show you that right now. So from this particular scene right here, it might be slightly underexposed back here, but I'll just show you what it does. We go into low, boom. You can see a massive difference between off and low, right? If we go to standard, have a look at the difference there. If we go back to off, let's bring it up to high. Boom. Standard, low, and off. Occasionally when I want to match the Panasonic GH5S to my Sony FX3, what I'll do, I'll leave that set to low and they look almost indistinguishable from each other. It's a really great setting. Experiment around, see what works best for you. From the eye resolution option, if we go down to the next page, we get into sound record level display. We want to make sure that this is on. This will allow us to see the audio levels on screen. It's this bit right down here that you can see moving up and down. I'm pretty sure that's on by default, but if it isn't, you can enable it or disable it that way. You can also change the sound record level adjustment in this option here as well. As you can see, it's currently set to -12. If you didn't skip the prior section, we actually mapped the sound level adjustment to the FN1 button on the top. So if I push it, we're back into that menu. On the next page down, we have sound record level limiter, and I've always got that set to on. I always recommend leaving that on just in case your audio spikes. The camera has its own ability to kind of reduce the gain to some extent before clipping. So always leave that on, even if you're shooting a really loud gig, for example, at a music festival, whatever the case may be, and using the onboard microphones, it will adjust accordingly, so at least you'll have a good scratch track that you can listen back to. From the same page, we go down to HDMI record output. Now, I've got this set to on, which means you can see everything that's being recorded out of this. But say, for example, I don't want all of that information on screen. I've got it currently set to off on my Panasonic GH5S and on the GH5 Mark II that I'm shooting this shot with, and of course, the Sony FX3, which I've got up over here. If you plan on doing any live streaming or live switching like what I'm doing right now, make sure that all of those options are off, unless of course you need to showcase the menu like I'm doing with this particular shot right here. Usually if I'm recording in the room here, I have all of this information on screen on my reference monitor behind my primary camera just to make sure that everything is working. None of that actual information gets recorded when you're recording to the internal SD card. Up next, we're going to go over to the next menu option, which is the blue wrench with the C. Now, if we go up to exposure, I'll give you a rundown of the settings that I use with the camera. Dual native ISO settings set to auto. If we go down to ISO increments, I set this to 1/3 EV as opposed to 1 EV. Setting the ISO increments to 1/3 EV will give us far more flexibility and options when it comes to setting the ISO manually. Extended ISO is a really handy feature that will allow the camera to give you lower ISOs and higher as well, depending on your shooting situation. Leave this to on if it's currently disabled. Let's cover all of the stuff you need to know about my manual focus settings and what I think works best, especially if you're in a studio situation. Now, everybody likes different things. Again, these are just my settings. If you like the stock settings with the picture-in-picture box, which magnifies a section that you need to be in focus, then you can leave it as is, but this is how I set it up. Here's a quick look at what I have on screen here. So if I go down to MF Assist, usually this is set to, I think, the focus option here, and this is set to picture-in-picture, and this is how it looks normally. I hate this box that comes up on screen. It just annoys me. So what I normally do, I go up to here, I turn this to off, and I go to full. So as I pull focus now, nothing changes on screen. This is much better to my eye. If you're using focus peaking, like you can see the blue line on screen, then you won't even need that particular function. But if you're a filmmaker and you need to pull critical focus, that's where that comes in really handy. So there's the right tool for the job and then unnecessary tools for the same job. Now, if we keep scrolling down a few pages here, we're going to get into some of the peaking options. So right here, I have focus peaking on. If we go to set, we can change the color from blue to whatever we like. So change this to a color that's really easy to see given your shooting environment. You can also set this up as a custom function button to get easy access into this. You can change the detect level from high to low as well. So it's really quite cool here. Low seems to be, some of these colors are a bit easier to see, at least in my opinion here. So you can see that I've changed it to yellow right now. Not the best choice given the color of that crappy door. But if I change this back to red, then we're in business. So wherever we pull focus now with this, you're going to see that it's going to be basically in red, which is what you want. Focus peaking is a tool I use 100% of the time. Anytime I'm in manual focus mode, even if I'm sitting here in the studio and the camera is in exactly the same spot, I'll leave focus peaking on as a reference to know that everything's good to go. Down from focus peaking, we have another really handy tool called Video Guideline. Video Guideline really helps you frame a shot with a different aspect ratio in mind. So for example, whether we're shooting a film with this camera or we're shooting a 1:1 aspect ratio video for Instagram or whatever the case may be, I'll show you how to set this up. We go into the Video Guideline option here. We can go into set. It's currently set to 16:9, which is the same as what I'm shooting in. So let's change this to something very obvious. 1:1, which is square. Let's go back here. We'll turn this on. And now you'll see that we get a square border on screen. The camera doesn't actually record in a different aspect ratio, but what it does, it allows you to frame within any of these aspect ratios. So once you get it into editing, you can set up a square project, crop it in, and you'll be in business. A lot of people like to shoot with zebras, but I find it really distracting, or zebras if you're in Australia or Canada. Now, if we go down to the zebra pattern, I've currently got it set to off. The reason why is, if we take a look at the back of the camera here, I've got that front button assigned to the waveform, which is how I like to expose a scene. Everyone works differently. If you don't like using this, you can turn on those zebras, but I find it awfully distracting. From the peaking options on screen, if we go down a couple of pages here, you get to one of my favorite tools on the camera, the red record frame indicator. This is set to off for some reason by default. It should always be set to on. It's a great tool and I'll show you why. Looking at the back of the camera here, you can see that it's set to on. If I hit record, you can see that big red box that comes up on screen. You also get the red dot in the corner as well as this little red icon over here. So there's lots of red letting you know that you're actually recording. If I turn this off, have a look at the difference. You could easily miss the fact that you're not recording. If you know what to look for, you'll be good, but leave this on. I wish Panasonic would just turn this on from default anytime you buy one of their cameras. If we go down to options, we go to lens position resume. The reason why this is always on, I can turn the camera off, come back the next day, turn it back on, sit right down, and I won't need to adjust focus. It's a great thing, especially if you're a YouTuber. Up now, I just wanted to show you a few handy things that you can turn on and off depending on your particular needs. This will come down to redundancy and functionality. So from the wrench on the far left now, the second one without the C, we're going to go down here to Wi-Fi. Now, I already showed you earlier how I customized the Wi-Fi option to this button over here. That's where you'll find it in the menu system. You can also turn on this wireless indicator on or off. This will allow a little blue light to show up on the camera over here if it's on. I think it's just on that corner. Yeah, right there. You'll see a little blue light. So you can turn that on or off depending on your particular situation. I usually leave it to on, which lets me know that it's on or off. Pretty self-explanatory. From the power wireless indicator option, if we go down to the next page, we're going to monitor display. Now, this is a really great way you can customize the back of the LCD screen. We can make it brighter or darker this way as well. We can change the contrast, hue, and all of these other settings. Now, I don't usually mess with this, but if you do need to make it brighter, you can do that. Interestingly enough, we also get a night mode right above it, which changes everything to red. So if you're shooting in low light, for example, and you don't want any spill, you can use this red mode. It's a little bit hard to really judge colors, obviously, but it's a good mode just for shooting in a low light scenario. You can also change the electronic viewfinder to red as well, which is a bit hard to see. Obviously it's in here, but you can turn that on or off using this menu option as well. On the next page down, if we go to system frequency, we can change this from NTSC. So if you're in North America, it will be already set to 59.94 Hertz. 50 Hertz, which is Australia and the UK and all the other countries that use that, and true 24 Hertz cinema. The 24 Hertz mode is different to 24p in NTSC mode. You get true 24 Hertz. So if you're an aficionado who needs that, it's built into the camera. If you want to check the firmware version, just go down to version display and you can see your lens and body firmware option. If we go down from version display here, it gets us into double slot function, which changes the recording method of the camera. By default, it's set to relay recording. Now, if you're just shooting at home and you have the ability to record everything again, if you lost some data, for example, through a corrupt SD card, you can leave it set to relay recording. Anytime I'm doing a paid gig or something very important, or if I travel, I'm always using backup recording. So this will transfer the same data to both cards. If you want to use allocation recording, this will allow you to record photos and video to separate cards. Backup recording is 100% critical if you're doing a paid job or if you're traveling and you don't want to lose any footage. Last time I went overseas, one of my SD cards failed and I had to go back the next day and film it all again. If I didn't have that opportunity to do so, I would have lost over 130 clips, which totally sucks. So use that anytime you've got an important gig. The last setting I'm going to show you here is save record camera settings. So if you want to save all of what you've got stored in the camera with these custom presets, you can hit save and it will save a file to the SD card. If you've got multiple cameras, you can essentially transfer that information to the next camera. So you'll put in the saved information SD card into the next camera, go to load, and it will load that file and it will set it up exactly as the last camera was left. If you've got 2 or 3 GH5S cameras, you can set up one, transfer that SD card to all of the others, load those files, and they'll be all set up identically. Just know though, if you've got an original GH5 in the mix or a GH5 Mark II or GH6, it won't work transferring your settings from the GH5 to those cameras or vice versa. It's camera specific. One of the biggest advantages of the GH5S is the fact we can use it with an external battery grip. If you haven't seen one of these before, it's a battery that you can put in amongst this grip here. It'll give you far more purchase on the camera and it will double the runtime of your camera. Now the GH5S has exceptional battery life, far better than the GH6, and may actually be even better than the GH5 Mark II. So it has some advantages there. You just simply connect this by taking off this little plug here. You'll then take off the rubber door on the bottom of the camera and just screw this in using this control. I did a full review of this on the channel when I first got it, and one of the things I thought it didn't do was change seamlessly between the external battery and the internal one, but it does work. Now, if you missed my original review, I'll link it up here, but just know if the battery in the grip goes flat first in your recording, it will then seamlessly swap to the internal battery. So just keep that in mind. I think I stuffed up on my original review, but these are great. If you want to check it out, I'll link it down below. Let's talk about lens selection from my least expensive to most expensive. One of my favorites is the one that I've got on this little guy right here. It's the 25mm f1.7 prime lens. This is small, it's fast, and it gives you great subject separation. While this lens isn't perfect and the autofocus motors aren't the fastest, if you're going to be doing a locked off shot like I am in this room, these lenses are some of the best for giving you a premium look. The lens on my GH5 Mark II right now is the 12 to 35mm f2.8 zoom. It's the 24 to 70 equivalent. It's a great lens. f2.8 is still fast enough that you can use it in some low light situations. But again, if you want the fastest lens for low light, get an f1.7 or f1.4. Or faster if you want to shoot completely manual. The lens that I'm using for this particular shot is the Panasonic Leica DG Vario 10 to 25mm f1.7 zoom lens. This is without question the most impressive lens and camera combination I've seen for Micro Four Thirds. This lens on the GH5S gives me lots of subject separation because the crop factor on the GH5S is slightly different to a GH6 or the original GH5. You get a slightly wider field of view and a little bit more background blur. Not that that's the be all and end all anyway, but if you want it, the GH5 paired with that lens looks fantastic, but you can get excellent results with this 25mm f1.7 prime. If you want to check out any of my lenses, I'll link them down below. The The last accessory I want to share with you is the DMW-XLR adapter. This is a great sounding audio adapter that just plugs into the hot shoe mount on the camera. I've got a Rode NT-G5 shotgun microphone above me, one XLR cable going in, and you can connect up to 2. So this is great. It means the audio is going to be in sync. I get high quality voice audio without needing to have a separate recorder or do any of that nonsense. So this is so much easier and it sounds great to my ear. Now, if you plan on live streaming, you can use this exact setup, run the HDMI out into a capture card and you're good to go. So there's lots to like about the DMW-XLR adapter. If you're using just wireless packs only, you won't need it. But if you plan on using a shotgun microphone, that's where it comes in handy. Let's wrap this video up. Again, thank you so much for watching. If it's been helpful, please leave a thumbs up. I'm a big fan of the GH5S, which is why I purchased 2 of them a little while ago. Again, being that I traded some in a while back, I really missed them. I felt like the trade-off in video quality wasn't worth the price difference when you compare the GH5S up against some of the more expensive cameras, even 3 times the price. I learned that the hard way. There's something special about the image quality out of these. And if you're in a situation where you're using them on a tripod in a studio, you're going to get some really excellent results. Sure, they don't have in-body image stabilization or the best autofocus, but if you're in a situation like this, I think they're one of the best tools for the job. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you soon. See ya.